Hello everyone, my name's Eugene and welcome back to Tuesday Night Legacy where we showcase Magic's most powerful formats. Tonight we're doing another deck tech where we go in depth with the player at the store to learn a little bit more about their deck and how it's been performing in our local meta. Tonight we have the Blue Menace 8 cast. Take it away, AJ.
Hello, welcome back to Tuesday Night Legacy Deck Techs. I'm AJ from Budget Brewers Binder, here with Eric, and today we're talking about Kappa Cannoneer.
Yeah.
So why Kappa Cannoneer, first of all? Why this 8-cast deck?
Well, yeah, so this 8-cast shell has existed for a while, but with the printing of Kappa Cannoneer, it got a really insane threat. I mean, it comes down as a 5/5. It's attacking usually as like an 8/8. Unblockable, and Ward 4, which is effectively hexproof in Legacy.
Since it's a very new card coming out of the Kamigawa Commander sets, let's actually talk about the card a little bit. So what does it do? Why don't you give us a read it off for us?
Yeah, sure. So it's 5 and a blue with improvise, so that means you can tap your artifacts to help pay for it. When an artifact enters the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and it's unblockable for the turn. And then its stat line is 4/4, but it triggers itself, so it enters as a 5/5.
Does it trigger every time an artifact enters too?
Yep, so that also counts with cards like Sai making Thopters or playing Seed of the Synod as a land. Any artifact entering the battlefield under your control will trigger it.
Then it becomes unblockable on top of that. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that the only win con in the deck right now, or what else do we have here?
No, I mean, it's definitely the best win con, but we also got Urza Saga with just insanely large construct tokens. You know, you're swinging with like 8/8 Urza Saga tokens with Shadow Spear on them. You could kind of count Sai as a win con. You know, you just make a bunch of
Thopters?
Yeah, you make a bunch of Thopters. And then you could also turn those Thopters into 4/4 constructs off of the other Saga target in the deck, Retrofitter Foundry.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Another question is, this is a fairly new deck to Legacy, so what does it do against the already established Legacy meta and the decks that are already there? How does it fare against those?
So it's kind of, its spot is that it's kind of good against most of the fair decks in the format. So you're pretty good against Delvers, especially game 1. You're pretty good against Death and Taxes as long as you dodge Wastelands, and you just dump over 4-color control piles and other stuff that's trying to prey on those Delver decks.
It does help when you have 4 Force of Will and 4 Chalice of the Void against the fairer decks.
Yeah, well, that's to give an explanation for why the sideboard is so heavily slanted towards combos, because you're kind of bad against combo. If Chalice of the Void on 1 doesn't do it, then you're in a bad spot. Your only interactive pieces is Chalice and Force of Will in the main deck.
Yeah, that tends to be makes sense. How long have we been playing this deck for?
Barely a month. I mean, it's only really been around for a month.
Fair enough.
Since Kappa Cannoneer
so
came out.
You've been playing the deck since it came out, so you kind of have a good understanding of how the deck works and functions.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, 8-cast was a deck in Legacy before, but it really kind of rose to prominence with the Cannoneer.
Fair enough. And then, how does it play in our meta, here at the shop?
Yeah, it's pretty decent. There's a lot of fair decks running around. The only stuff that is at the shop here it's pretty bad against is there's one Elves player, and I don't think I could beat an Allosaurus Shepherd with this deck. So
pretty good.
Overall, it does pretty okay, but there's a couple of things running around. It's also pretty good against the Merit Lage decks, the Dark Depths combo decks, because you have Aether Spellbomb in the main, and then you also have Shadow Spear to gain a bunch of life, so you're regularly above 20 by the time a Merit Lage comes out, and you can just kind of race it.
Not to mention Sai making chump blockers forever.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the sideboard then.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start over here. We have 1 Grafdigger's Cage. We saw that last week with Pedro, but why are you playing 1 specifically?
Mostly for Green Sun Zenith decks and Natural Order decks. It can also, of course, come in against Reanimator.
Makes sense. And then Pithing Needles are just what? For Planeswalker hate? Wasteland hate?
Yeah, primarily it's for against lands decks. You end up having to name a bunch of different stuff. Lands decks are playing Besagus now, so you can name that so they can channel it to kill your stuff.
That's pretty good.
And then, of course, you're naming stuff like Maze of Ith and Wasteland.
Makes sense. And then Dismembers here just for what? The aggro decks and
yeah,
the Murktide decks?
Yeah, anytime you play against a deck with white in it, you kind of have to be worried about stuff with, for example, Thalia could be rough against you. And then Kataki is like a nightmare, so you have to be able to kill.
Makes sense. Have some removal on the main deck.
Yeah, you gotta be able to kill hate bears.
Makes sense. Fairy Macabre, similar idea for the graveyard hate and stuff.
Yeah, it's just an anti-graveyard hate card.
Brazen Borrower, what's that one? To 2 Brazen Borrowers? Why?
Yeah, 2 ZVs. That's for just problematic permanents. Again, like stuff like if you're expecting Stony Silence or any hate cards, you can bring that in, and it's also an additional threat that's not an artifact, which can be relevant sometimes.
Can be helpful. 2 Hull Breachers.
Yeah, one of these is supposed to be Crucible of Worlds.
Okay.
But yeah, I just slotted in an extra Hull Breacher.
Extra Hull Breacher, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 4 Force of Negation.
Yeah, and that's obviously good against combo. You also bring it in against
Bring that in against lands potentially.
Yeah, so one thing that sometimes it's just swaps 1-for-1 with Force of Will. So if you're playing against lands where they have like Life from the Loam and stuff that you want to be able to exile, you just make that 1-to-1 swap. And then in other matchups, you go up to the full 8 forces where they're either going to have hate cards or you need to be able to stop them from doing their thing.
All right, so we'll come back to the deck now that we've talked about the sideboard. Looking at the mana base, so 4 Saga.
Yep.
What does Saga do besides big constructs for your consistency?
Yeah, it does literally everything. It taps for mana, obviously. The construct tokens are huge threats. And then the search mode is also excellent because it adds an artifact into play that's uncounterable, so you can get around your own Chalice on one. So there's 3 Saga targets. You could get any of those depending on the situation. You could get a Bauble if you need to just like draw an extra card to hopefully have a blue card to pitch to force. You could get Lotus Petal or Mox Opal if you need more mana. It's like the best card in the deck by a lot.
It helps to smooth out the game plan a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I noticed here 2 Otawara.
Yeah, obviously it's a mono blue deck. Cutting down on islands could be a little problematic because you can be soft to wasteland sometimes, but it's just a great main deck way. It always gives you a main deck out to whatever your opponent's doing. It bounces, creatures, artifacts, enchantments. So just about anything that your opponent's doing, an Otawara could answer it. And then, of course, you're playing 2 different legendary creatures, and so that cost could be brought down as low as 1 in a blue.
Makes sense. It's a very low land count, but you do have 4 Lotus Petal and 4 Mox Opal.
Yeah, it's a lot of artifact mana. So 16 lands plus the artifact mana makes you a favorite with Ancient Tomb and the artifact mana. You are a favorite to be able to cast a Chalice on one on the first turn of the game.
Pretty good. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific cards in the deck. First of all, let's go with Emery. Like, what does she do for the especially late game in your deck?
Yeah, Emery's just an excellent grindy card. One thing that could happen is like your Kappa Cannoneer gets pyroblasted, or maybe you even mill over a Kappa Cannoneer when you play the Emery, and then you can just buy it back. You could loot Baubles to refill your hand over and over again.
Gotcha. Then Psy, Maverick Thopterus.
Yeah, Psy is pretty sick. The Thopters, just every time I believe it's cast, right?
Cast an artifact.
Yeah, whenever you cast, you make a 1/1 Thopter.
It's pretty good. Helps to keep you building a board state far across. Mm-hmm. And then let's do the 8 cast part of the deck.
Yeah, that's kind of the shell that's like, the deck gets its name from that. Just being able to vomit out your whole hand and then reload almost immediately. I've seen as many as like 3 or 4 thought cast effects on turn 1, and it's kind of gross.
It is a pretty fun card to be playing. I do play it in Pauper myself.
Yeah, it's great.
But Thought Monitor, especially with Emery, gives you a little bit more late game draw as well, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful. You could chump block and just loop it with Emery, and yeah, it's amazing.
It's pretty sick. And then we have the 8 Baubles. Mm-hmm. Mishra's Bauble, if you don't know what that is by now. Very annoying card. Look at the top part of your opponent's library when you sacrifice, and then draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep for 0 mana. So it's a 0 mana replacement. But then Urza's Bauble.
Yeah, this one's weird. It's hard to do in paper, but you pop it and you look at a random card out of your opponent's hand. Hilariously, they're not supposed to know what card you look at. So you have to do this thing where they shuffle their hand upside down. You pick a card yourself and look at it, put it back into their hand, and then they shuffle it and then pick their hand back up. It's the same effect as Mishra's Bauble where you draw in the next upkeep, but the actual mechanical part of looking at a random card in your opponent's hand is kind of annoying. But it's just more fodder for improvise and affinity, etc.
Makes sense. And then we're on the counterspell plan. Chalice being kind of a counterspell, more of a control piece.
Yeah, and really the only reason this deck plays Chalice is because you don't play any 1-drops other than your Saga targets, so it's just kind of free to be able to play Chalice. And,
especially with Ancient Tomb.
With Ancient Tomb, yeah.
And then Force of Will just in case you need it.
Yep.
You are like a 50-50 on blue and colorless spells. How often does Force of Will get stranded in your hand without another blue spell?
Somewhat rarely. You do have to plan around it. Like there are situations where you've emptied out your whole hand and you still have a little bit of mana left, and you could go for like another Thought Cast, but it makes more sense to hold the Thought Cast in your hand with the Force of Will to prevent a meltdown or something like that.
Fair enough. Well, anything else you want to talk about with the list? Maybe there's a Saga tutor package real quick.
Yeah, so I would say like the bog standard is 1 Shadow Spear, 1 Retrofitter Foundry, and then usually most lists are playing a third one. So I'm playing Ether Spellbomb because you could bounce Cauldron tokens, you could bounce Merit Lages,
Murktides.
Yeah, Murktide Regent. Other people will play like main deck Graveyard Hate if that's a concern. I could see playing like a second Shadow Spear because sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation where you've chaliced on one and then you draw the Shadow Spear, and that's kind of a bummer. So having access to the second one could be a good thing.
Then you play it into the Chalice and Emery it back, and then you just get it countered forever. But you're making Thopters with side.
That's definitely a thing. You could you get them on cast, so you could loop stuff even if you Chalice locked yourself out of the game. Yeah.
Another thing to think about. All right, well, from Tuesday Night Legacy, I've been AJ with Bludgeon Brewers Binder. This is Eric.
I'm Eric.
And we will see you in the next video.
Big thank you to Spellhold for the use of their space and the use of their players for all of these videos. If you like that deck, it's in the description of this video. Please like and subscribe if you like these videos and you want to see more of them. Also, if you have a specific deck that you want to go in depth on or want us to go in depth on, please drop it in the comments below and we'll do our best to accommodate. Our next video is going to be Goblin Charbelcher versus UR Delver, and we'll see you next time.